Right. So this chapter starts with this kind of theory, not theory, this kind of a data. This is U.S. imports of golf club. Okay? So U.S. imports golf club from China, Thailand, Vietnam, many different countries. So this is what they import from foreign countries. But if we look at this, then U.S. exports golf clubs to foreign countries too. They imports and exports the same goods. That kind of things cannot be explained this so-called traditional model. If they import golf club, they have to export different things, yeah, like rice or something. If US if they export golf club, that means they have competitive advantage in producing golf club. So they have to specialize in making golf club and export it. Instead, they have to import like other things from foreign countries. So far we discussed the trade between different industries. Car and rice, automobile and textile, and today apparel and high tech. So far we discussed the two different outputs, the two different industries. Two different outputs from different industries, right? Car, rice. So one is a capital intensive goods, the other is a labor intensive goods. They're totally different industries. So far what we discussed is inter-industry trade. Trade between different industries itself. In real world, so many trades are made within the same industry. More than 50%. More than 50-something%. Like US exports golf club, at the same time imports golf club. Yeah? Japan exports Honda cars, but imports BMW cars. Something like this. That kind of pattern, which is very common in the real world, cannot be explained by this traditional model. And that is the purpose of this chapter, new theory, to explain this kind of intra-industry trade. Trade within the same industry. Not between different industries, but within the same industry. That's the starting point of this new model. How to analyze those kind of things. But even though people understood the importance of this intra-industry, same industry trade, technically, theoretically, it was not very easy to analyze those kind of patterns. That's why until late 1970s, people couldn't do it because it was difficult to analyze using theories. Yeah? So that's why, this part of theory is a lot more difficult than traditional theories. Yeah? So that's the question. Why does US export and import golf clubs to and from the same country? Yeah? So far, we discussed so-called perfect competitive market. So does that mean? It needs some theory behind that. But to say in one word, one sentence, the perfect competition means there are so many firms out there. So each firm is very small. So they cannot affect the price out there. So because they're too small, even they produce a lot. There's just too small firms. Here we discuss so-called monopolistically competitive market. It's a competition, but close to monopoly. So we have two different extremes in economics: perfect competition and monopoly. Monopoly is only one firm in the market. Perfect competition, so many firms in the market. It's like almost infinity and only one. Monopolistic competition is somewhere in between. It has many markets, but each firm is not that small. It's large enough that they can control the price in the market. So we are discussing that kind of things in this chapter. So basics of monopolistic competition model and how consumer choices and prices are affected under monopolistic competition when trade opens, and what are the gains from trade. Yeah, that's also an important part. And gains and adjustment costs and some gravity equation based on that. So most goods are differentiated goods. So this is also a different part. What is differentiated goods? This is different from different goods. Yeah? So differentiated is different from different. Yeah? So different good is like a car and rice. Goods from different industry, totally different. But differentiated goods is like a Honda and BMW. Same car, but differentiated. Same type of car, but different brand, something like this. I mean, this is the real world. We have so many brands, so many same goods, but different brands. Yeah? That's the differentiated goods. This is what we are doing. So they are not identical. And we allow for imperfect competition, particularly monopolistic competition. And in doing so, we can analyze the so-called increasing return to scale. This is what we did before. So the return to scale. If you hire 10 people, those 10 people produce 20. So if you hire 20, then those people expected to produce 40. So if you double the input, the output is expected to double. That is a constant return to scale. This is what we did so far. Do you remember if a capital labor ratio goes up, the MPL goes up, MPK goes down, all based on this kind of constant return to scale. But we are doing is increasing return to scale. If you double the input, then output increase more than double. Yeah? So that's increasing return. Your return is increasing more than your input rate. And if your return is increasing in that way, your cost is decreasing. So we can say that. So your output, what you produce and what you spend, your output and cost are like a mirror image. We say mirror image. So what is increase in return to scale? If you have a labor and output, let's say Q, it's increasing like this, not like a line. If you have a more input, double the input, output increase more than that. So it increases like this. This is an IER return to scale. Then it's a Q and TC. When we write the total cost, then we have a output here and cost here. If we produce more and more output, cost for the output is like this. If your output function is production function is like this, then cost function is like this. It's like a mirror. This is like noise. And if total cost is like this, average cost by definition is the slope from this origin. So this slope is average cost. This keeps decreasing because it looks like this. This slope is getting flatter. The slope itself is average cost, and when we draw this average cost, then it looks like this. This is what we assume in increasing return to scale. In constant return to scale, your output function is like this, right? If you double the input, output doubles. Isn't the same? And your total cost, same. If you show that in the mirror, the same thing. It's the total cost, and your average cost. The slope is same, same thing. The average cost is actually slope of this line from the origin. So far we implicitly assume this kind of functional form so far up to chapter 5, but now we are doing this. And how is it that different? And that's very different. We can discuss many things. I mean, I just quickly go over all these things, but without doing things. So by doing so, we can now understand the intra-industry trade of these differentiated goods. Why Japan export Honda and imports BMW? Yeah? So there's an intra-industry trade. It's the same as a differentiated goods trade, right? It imports in the same industry. And we can also explain that larger countries should trade the most. This is a prediction by the gravity equation. I'm going to explain that later on, what that means. And monopolistic competition helps to understand this. So, very briefly, so far we assumed homogeneous goods. Goods are same. Car is car. There's no Honda, no BMW, no Hyundai, no whatever. Car is car, just car. This is what we did so far. And rice is rice. Like what is what? So we assume it's a homogeneous goods. So good is in the same industry, we assume only one type of goods. But in the real world, we have a differentiated goods. Yeah? This is what we have in interest theory. And perfect competition, I mean, each firm is very small, so they cannot affect the price. And we assume it's imperfect competition, particularly monopolistic competition. So far, we had a constant return to scale, and now we assume increasing return to scale. And inter-industry trade, and intra-industry trade. And if we have an inter-industry trade, how does that happen? Like one country is capital abundant, that's why they make capital-intensive goods. The other country is labor abundant, they make labor-intensive goods and trade. And capital-abundant countries usually developed country, and labor-abundant countries usually developing countries. And we say north is a rich country, south is not rich country. So north-south trade is explained by this traditional theory. But these days, so many trades are made between those north and north. How can we explain that kind of things? Like how can we explain the trade between Japan and Germany, which looks similar in terms of this abundant things? Still, we can explain from this new trade theory. And this is something like a predetermined destiny. Yeah? Like why this country is a lot of labor, why this country is a lot of capital? I mean, this country is like China, so it's a lot, many population. It's a large country, like a lot of land, and there's many people are living there. It's something that is determined from the beginning. Why this country has an advantage in wine? Because they have a lot of sunshines, something like this. Yeah? So this is based on kind of a destiny things. So once one country is a labor-abundant country, it seems that they have to specialize in exporting labor-intensive goods, and they have to be labor-abundant country forever. So they cannot explain this kind of a shift or many dynamic patterns in the real world. And this new theory, there's no such thing. There's predetermined. So everything starts from very small and accidental change. So one country starts to have some advantage in some goods very accidentally. Then that gains more and more advantage and becomes some famous in one industry. And that means even though this country has advantage in one good, that advantage can change very frequently. There's no predetermined advantage, predetermined abundance or intense, that kind of things. We cannot say anything about that. And that is very similar to old economic geography and new economic geography. So in fact, basically this person who got Nobel Prize in 2008, he is the person who did both. Using the same model, so explain both new economic geography and new new trade theories. That's why, I mean, the geography and trade is getting more and more similar because of his contribution. I mean, same, like old economic geography, people say that, based on Jeffrey Sachs' argument. He published a very controversial papers, 1995 something. He showed a map of the world, and he showed maybe later on. There's a map of the world, and it seems that here's a color of income. Some poor countries a color of a red, or some rich countries a yellow, something like this. And almost all poor countries are located somewhere in tropical area. And rich countries are some cold area. I mean, statistically that's fine, right? That makes sense. Then based on that, the argument, he said this climate, if it's too warm, too hot, then people lose its productivity. They don't want to work hard, something like this. So that was very controversial. Some people say, oh yeah, that's true, but some people say that's not true. And so based on his argument, people overcome how people know how to overcome this coldness. Fire was discovered a long time ago, yeah? But how to overcome this heat, I mean a fan or air conditioner is very a modern technology, They didn't know how to cool down this temperature. Yeah? So that was his argument. And but if that, even though that may be true, then if that's true, then what should we do? There's no conclusion, right? And then if there's a conclusion, then what can we do about this economic development of those areas? There's no answer, no clue. But based on this new economic geography, everything is very small accidental, and any country can gain momentum for economic development, and any country can do some more growth, and that's new economic geography things. And that field, basically, I'm originally from this field, economic geography. That's what I'm doing originally. So starting from there, I was interested in international trade, but my original specialty is economic geography. And that was a very minor field, but thanks to his contribution, it became some more major field, but still not very major. But so I want to open this course maybe in the future here at ch6. There's a lot of things to discuss. How geography affects economic development. So maybe I can make a name, like geography and development, something. So I can discuss like urbanization. So urban-rural problem and disparity between urban and rural, and I mean there are many things that can be discussed in this context of economic development. And so this old theory is very well established. So there has been so many theories, but almost all died. And this one is very clean. It's clear to understand. So far we studied this, so it's very clear to understand who gains, who loses. And this one is just 20 years or 10 years old. It's very new, so not well established. It's still going on. So it's not clear about the gain and loss, and very difficult technically, but they can be a good alternative for these traditional theories. And more specifically, then what are the gains from trade? In traditional model, we could show very clearly showing two indifference curves, like from here to there. After trade, there are overall gains from trade. Even though some people loses from trade, but gain is more than losses, so there are overall gains from trade. This is what we did so far. Here, that's not really clear. And we can say something like this. For consumers, they can be happier by increasing this variety of goods. This is one gain. What you buy is actually the same thing. You can buy this book in local bookstore. You can buy like a large bookstore. You can buy the same thing. You buy like some clothes. You can buy some small store, or you can go to like a large mall. And if you want to buy some like a water or some daily like a food, you can buy small mart like a 7-Eleven there, or you can buy like a huge mart. Why do we go to a large place, even though what we are buying is actually the same thing? Sometimes, I mean, it can be cheaper, but sometimes we simply want to choose from many things. So we have we enjoy choosing something. So if we have more and more like a differentiated products from different brands, same goods but different brands, then we can enjoy this kind of choice itself. So far we say that human beings are greedy, so the more the better. If we have a higher level of indifference curve, that means we buy more. So we focus on buying more and more and more, because the more the better. But here, buying same thing but choosing from many things, that increases our utility. And something like this. So not gain from more consumption, but gain from more variety of goods. Yeah? I forgot to write here one thing, but one thing is that price will decrease. If we have a monopolistic competition later on, like firms can have some like a R&D something. Eventually, price of that good will decrease for consumers. So the good things. So price will decrease, but at the same time they can choose from the variety of goods. For firms, they can have a gains by decreasing average cost. This is what we assume. If we have an increase in return to scale, that means our average cost decreases. If we produce more and more and more, our average cost is decreasing. So what a good news. If we produce more, the cost is decreasing. Yeah? This is good news. How can they decrease the cost? They can gain something from concentration and agglomeration. By being concentrated in one place, they can learn from each other. How did you produce that good in such a in 1 hour? How did you produce that much? So what is your competitive advantage? Please teach me your advantage. Then each country, because there are like a car, like a Japanese Honda and German BMW, the same industry, so they can learn from each other by trading. So that kind of thing was never imagined before in traditional models. How can they learn from each other? Because we assume this intra-industry, same industry trade. So they trade, they interact, and they can learn from each other. So learning by trading, and we have a knowledge spillover. And by doing so, we have more time, more for research and development. And that way, they can lower down the price. So even though they lower the price, still they can gain more. It's a good news for firms, at the same time, good news for consumers. So these are gains from concentration and agglomeration. That is like some geographical part. In order for one country to become developed, we need some part of some concentration or something. We need to have a successful city, or there's a part of that can be discussed in economic geography, but there's closely related to this international trade. So in international economic geography, we do the same thing. What I was interested before is that what is the optimal size of city? City. Why do you want to live in city, not in the rural area? Because there's many things to enjoy. Yeah? So we can go to some school very easily. We can have some very good metro system, or there are many things very convenient surrounding us. So there's a good part of a concentration. But if you have too much concentration, the concentration becomes congestion. Yeah? So over concentration, then that may affect negatively to that country's economic development. Something like this. That's the economic geography part. But again, in international trade, we can have some same idea. If you have a concentration, that has some a synergy effect on that from the concentration. So it's like this. To get some examples, after trade, the number of firms in each industry decreases. So before trade, suppose in my country there are 150 firms before trade. And after trade, some firms will leave my market because they lost the competition, and only a small amount of firms will be in my country, 100. But I can trade with country B with the same industry. So eventually, for consumers, they can get the goods from 200 companies' goods, and company itself can before it was 150, now it's 200. That means they have more firms, more friends to learn from each other. So basically, we have more concentration after trade. Even though my country's firm will decrease, but if we consider foreign firms within the same industry, the total number of firms will increase. And by doing that kind of an increased number of firms, we have gains from concentration, agglomeration. Agglomeration is the same as a concentration. Yes, yeah. If we go somewhere using taxi, if you take a taxi alone, then you have to pay the full amount of the fare. But if you have your friend, then they can share. If you have 3 people, it's getting cheaper and cheaper. So that's the gains from concentration. Yeah? If there are more and more firms located in the same area, they can share this transportation cost and something like this. By doing many things, they can lower the cost and increase the gains. So that are basically the gains from trade. But how to analyze those gains numerically, graphically, that's not as easy as it is. And Paul Krugman's contribution, trade and geography. So let me take a little time to explain about him, because he's one of the most important person in that. So he got the Nobel Prize 2008. Seems that this doesn't work. We start from this, but in order to understand this monopolistic competition model, we need to review many micro theories. So that's why I decided not to cover all these things. It's a whole, like a one part of microeconomics, and yeah. And this course is not about international trade only. It's international economic relations. That means in November I need to cover macro side as well, like how we have a balance of payment, exchange rates, and something like this. So yeah, no time to do that. Anyway, so we have to know all these things to understand this monopolistic competition. And so we start with the monopoly equilibrium. And from there, so I'm not explaining that much in detail. So each firm, so this in monopolistic competition, we assume that each firm produces a good that is similar but different. Yeah? So that's the one assumption. And secondly, there are many firms, but not as many as perfect competition. There's so many firms, but each firm is like has some power to affect the market. That means each firm has a capacity to have some like a research and development, and they can learn from each other. If firm is too small, then they don't have a capacity to have R&D and learning from each other. No capacity to have economies of scale. So somewhere in between monopoly and perfect competition. And so average cost goes down. This is the important part. So firms producing using a technology with an increasing return to scale, then average cost will decline. And yeah, average cost will decline. And how to get this average cost from variable cost, total cost, and average cost? So basically, mathematically, average cost is this divided by this. Because the total cost increases in this way, like this. Average cost, which is this divided by this, decreases actually. So we can formally prove it, but we can simply see this kind of numbers, and we can actually see average cost is declining. And assumption 4 is that because firm can enter and exit the industry freely, monopoly profit at zero in the long run. This is similar to perfect competition. In perfect competition, if there are some profits left in the long run, then all firms behave like kind of profit hunters. So all firms. So if I am enjoying some positive profit, then you all come to my market and take my profit until there's nothing left. So each firm's profit is a zero in the long run. And in monopolistic competition, we accept that kind of a theories. So we have a competition actually. It's different. In monopoly, in the long run, firms' profit is still positive, but we have somewhere in between. We have several firms, but their profits are zero in the long run. But it's not crucially important. Yeah, so that means we have a zero profit. Average cost is tangent to demand curve. Then I mean, this is not important part, but your profit is total cost, total revenue minus total cost, which is P times Q. This is what you sell in the market. You sold like 100 million of goods with the price of something. This is the amount of money that you receive by selling some goods. And total cost is some amount of money that you spend to make that goods. And total average cost by definition is total cost divided by Q. This is what I did before. And so total cost is AC times Q. Okay? So we can say Q is P minus AC. So if P is equal to AC, demand curve is basically the same as a price line. If price line is same as average cost, if P is equal to AC, profit should be equal to zero. So that's why in monopolistic competition, we deal with a case in which this price line is a demand curve is tangent to its average cost curve. It's not like go above, below, but it has to be always tangent, mean on one point. So assume this kind of a zero profit. And that's the case before trade. And after trade, more and more firms, before trade, I explained the case that suppose we have 150 farms in the market, and after trade, some farms will leave, so domestically 100, but if we include 100 farms for a foreign country, then eventually more farms. That's why we have more farms and more goods, and we have economies of scale, then consumers can enjoy the variety goods, and farms can learn from each other. So we have more farms eventually in the same industry. And if you have more farms, then each farm's demand curve becomes flatter because, this is also a different part. Getting more elastic. The consumers, what is the elasticity? It's a choice. If you have more choices, then our elasticity will increase. But I'm not going to go deeply but part. Anyway, if you have more farms after trade in the same industry, then demand curve will shift flatter. So in the after trade, since for some firms are making losses, some firms will exit, and firms will increase the demand for remaining firms' product. And we now have NP firms that is fewer than NA firms. So before trade 150 and now 100. But it includes both domestic and foreign firms, then 2 times NT. So eventually it's more than before. Yeah? So that remains. The remaining firms have some capacity to have R&D. The larger number of firms will create gains from concentration agglomeration. The new demand curve lies to the right of old demand curve, which is flatter than old one due to the elasticity from product variety. Like this. So before it was 8, something like this, and now this. So if we compare 2 points before trade and after trade, price went down and more output. So more output in the market. So consumers can choose more, even though they're going to buy the same thing, but they can choose from the cookies from Denmark, from Britain, and cars from Japan, from Germany, and many different things. So that's the economies of scale, and farms can lower the price. So they can learn from each other how to make that goods efficiently. So they can lower down this cost, and their knowledge will increase. So eventually the price will be reduced. And that's also good news for consumers. They can buy the goods in a cheaper price. So everything starts from this more farms, which is economies of scale, increasing return to scale. So that's the gains from trade. At point C, a drop in price, the gains from trade to consumers, although there are fewer products, we have like this. And that's the real world story. If you have a trade, then some people will be have unemployment, but there's so-called trade adjustment cost, and that can be temporary. So if you have a NAFTA, NAFTA is a good example of explaining those kind of trade between U.S. and Canada, which looks similar in terms of competitive advantage, but they still have gains from trade by trading each other. And if we doing so, there are some over time, however, these job losses were more than made up by those creation. So this job loss is temporary based on this kind of research, based on this textbook. So NAFTA is more gains than loss. Even though we may have a loss, that is temporary, but eventually the loss will be compensated by the gains, and let's have a free trade. Yeah? So NAFTA is good. Of course, there are so many papers that is against this NAFTA. NAFTA is bad, especially for Mexico. So developing countries affected most negatively, but mainstream people think that is. And in Mexico case, maquiladora industry. What is the meaning of maquiladora? Maquiladora.
No, actually, in English I cannot explain.
But they just say a maquiladora industry. That is after NAFTA between U.S. and Mexico. All Mexican farms moved to the borderline of this U.S. and Mexico border, and those are built along this borderline. That's called like a maquiladora industry, and there's quite boom, and that creates a overall gains to Mexico after NAFTA. So textbook support is a free trade with NAFTA, even though some other people say that this is bad for this country. So that's the maquiladora plants. Some maquiladora is like farms along this borderline, and farms non-maquiladora, and that's different things. So traders, so if in the U.S. Somebody loses a job after trade, then they have some assistance, TAA, so people get some subsidy. But that kind of thing was heavily criticized by the author of bestsellers, other books. Then this is only for developed countries and developing countries. Theoretically nice, but in realistically, it's not really implemented well. And some other topics. Then, if intra-industry is important, then how can we measure it? So that's the simple formula. So if we know how much they export, how much they import, then that is the formula. That means if United States imports $1 million of the golf club and export $1 million of golf club, then according to this formula, so 1 million and 1 million. Imports 1 million, export 1 million. Then what about this formula? What do you think? If both are 1 million, what is the index of US? 1? So suppose export is 1 million, import is 1 million. Then first 1/2 of import plus export, which is 1. So 1 plus 1, 2. So this is 1, right? What about minimum of import and export? What is the minimum of 1 and 1? Which is smaller? Same. Then what is the minimum of 1 and 1? 1. Which is smaller between this and this? I mean, maximum is also 1, minimum is also 1. If you have a midterm score, midterm exam, then suppose somebody has a 0, somebody has 100. Minimum score is a 0. But everybody has the same score, then minimum is this. So 1 over 1, so 1. So if this index is 1, that means this is a perfect case of intra-industry. This United States, they export 1 million golf clubs and 1 million golf clubs, and it's the same thing. That's the perfectly intra-industry if index is 1. If US exports $1 million of golf club and does not import any golf club like this, then what is that number? 0. What is the minimum of 0 and 1? 0, right? So 0 is here. Whatever number we have is a 0 or something is 0. So 0 is the case of the perfect inter-industry. So if you look at the data, then golf club's case, that's the one good example for intra-industry is close to 1, and this kind of things is only 3%. That is a typical case of inter-industry. Yeah? So depending on goods in industry, they have a different patterns. This it's very easy to get this kind of data. In each country has this kind of a sectoral some data, data for import export, and it's not very difficult to get this index. Yeah? Gravity. So this is a very important empirical question in this chapter 6. Then how can we test these kind of things? And using some model, so-called gravity model. We know this gravity model from we have Isaac Newton. Apple drops to the ground because we have two forces between Apple and Earth, and forces toward ground is so huge, so that's why Apple drops. Yeah? But usually we have two forces, two objects, object 1 and 2, and there are two masses, and the force between two masses is proportional to their mass and counter-proportional to their distance. So this is like a gravity equation, and we apply that things to international trade. And two countries' trade is proportional to their GDP size and counter-proportional to their distance. If there are large and large countries, then they trade more, and like neighbors and trade more. So based on this model, they have all regression analysis and keep going on. And I think it takes, I think, maybe 20, 30 minutes to discuss. So let's stop at this moment. And when we meet in 2 weeks, not next week, in 2 weeks, I'm going to continue from this part and quickly finish this one and move on to chapter 8. How many people took stats to the quantitative analysis? And did you use some like software, computer software? So did you use that in computer lab here in class? Then probably I think it's going to be a good idea to meet in computer lab. So even though it's not really a statistical course, so maybe you can do some very simple practice. So I have a data set. So you can. So I use as data, not SPSS. Maybe this is a good way to know what that is. And so in 2 weeks, let's meet in the computer room. Then probably maybe only 30 minutes. Then I think I can finish. Hopefully that we're gonna move here. Yeah. So 2 weeks on this floor, right? The next room, not here. And no quiz. Yeah.